Adam.
Yes, Beth.
Team Joel or Team Mike?
I'm going to go with Team Joel.
All right. You better explain that.
Yeah, so I guess I had the most even-handed introduction to Mystery Science Theater 3000 possible, because the very first thing I saw was the movie, which I guess worked in that I think it was supposed to draw in people to more than just who could access Comedy Central. And I saw that, and then I immediately saw like the first few Rhino tapes, which was Pod People and Cave Dwellers and Mitchell and Brain That Wouldn't Die.
So your first experience was with Mike, but then you switched teams.
Yes, I did. I essentially thought, wow, this is for me. But then I saw, I believe it was Pod People, and I thought, no, I have been to paradise, and it is Joel Robinson.
Sleepy Joel Robinson.
Yeah, it's nice because it's also like, it's a version of the show that you can have a quiet nap to, because Joel's like sweet little voice can just bring you on to Naptown.
It's true. He is less intrusive.
He lacks the forceful and rugged masculinity of Michael J. Nelson.
I think we call it farm boy truthfulness.
But one of the things that got me into the show, and I kind of preferred just in general from the Joel era, or at least I would say the era of bright lighting, because that's still around in season 5 when Mike takes over, is that it seems to be unabashedly, like, unashamed of looking handmade. Like, it doesn't matter that you can see the strings on Crow. It doesn't matter that in a lot of episodes you can see, like, the weird little whatever hook mechanism is making Tom's lips move. Gypsy is like a towering mess. And a lot of times there are, like, malaprops that they just leave in. People will just correct themselves on air, and it's like, it's good enough.
Yeah, it has kind of a Michelle Gondry homemade charm to it, and I agree that is very sweet. I miss the nothing about Crow moves except for his mouth and his extremely creepy animated eyes that just roll around in his casing for no particular reason, except for that it's the easiest thing to move.
Yeah, watching Rocketship X-M, I was reminded of how good Trace would get like later on, because like Crow becomes super expressive and like really mobile. I don't know, around like season 4 or something. And I feel like such a tool saying this, but he really makes that puppet sing.
Well, I am Team Mike, unabashedly, which is ironic because, like you, my first encounter was a Joel episode, and I was instantly hooked. But when I started watching Comedy Central, that was just a rerun, and they were actively in season 6, 7 territory. And I agree it has a very different feel with Mike, but I also just found it a bit sharper. The joke density was stronger, and I think that's what I connected to more than the homemadedness. I will admit that the host segments became really peripheral at that point, but I was happy to see the Invention Exchange go. I was just like, okay, bye-bye prop comedy. That's fine with me.
Oh man, I love the Invention Exchanges.
I know this is going to be a thing where I glean over it, and you want to go deep into the complexities of the make.
But yes, you were Team Mike.
Yeah, Team Mike, just as a host, I know he has a very different feel, and it changed, where he kind of detached from the paper-thin premise increasingly as the seasons went on. But I liked his aw shucks farm boy approach to hosting, and I thought that worked really well with the suddenly much more sophisticated bots who led him around by the nose for the first little while. But mainly for me, it was actually watching the movie. I was just laughing much more. Whereas I found with Joel, it's like, oh, I get that reference. Oh, that's a nice song. It felt like I was just with friends, whereas opposed to Mike, I was just like, oh, you're eviscerating this movie and I enjoy this. It might have been because I was a teenager that enjoyed the sarcasm and the nihilism and just the sharper edge of the Mike era. But who can say? It'll be interesting to see if I have a different experience now that I am a worn-out adult.
Yes, now you'll be a slow convert to the sleepier, quieter, and altogether more wholesome Joel era.
More comfortable, less challenging. Although there were some things that challenged me here that I hope we can get into. There were some surprisingly nasty jokes, and I was just like, whoa.
So this week's experiment, and the first episode we looked at for It's Just a Show, was Rocketship X-M, Season 2, Episode 1. Rocketship X-M is a shaggy dog story where a pilot, a flight engineer, and 3 scientists embark on the first manned mission to the moon, get lost in space with neither a mincing saboteur nor Robbie the robot to blame, meet the Flintstones on Mars, and die horribly over the sunny beaches of Nova Scotia, as we all will one day. And now that sounds bonkers, I know. But for the Rocketship X-M crew, the craziest thing they encounter is each other. You expect to see the ship littered with like Dilbert strips and a hang-in-there-baby poster in engineering. There's even a woman on board, which neither the film nor ship's pilot Colonel Floyd will let us forget. Floyd, played with toxic levels of smugness by one Lloyd Bridges, berates Dr. Van Horn, played by Osa Masson, for pursuing a career in science instead of being his idea of the perfect woman.
Well, I've been wondering, how does a girl like you get mixed up in a thing like this in the first place?
I suppose you think that women should only cook and sew and bear children?
Isn't that enough?
Landing on Mars due to technical difficulties, the crew find traces of past civilizations among the planet's radioactive rubble. Before the implications of this are considered, cavemen and one cave woman emerge to throw rocks at the crew, as we all wanted to. 2 crewmen keel over and die when attacked by this army of EGAs, but the survivors don't have enough fuel to return to Earth. So this cheerful, ordinary 1950s sci-fi film ends with astronauts burning to death as they re-enter our atmosphere. Now, Beth, that's the movie. What happened in the show itself? What happened during the host segments?
Lots of stuff. So first of all, this is the intro to the 2nd season of Mystery Science Theater 3000 on Comedy Central. And in the prologue, Joel informs us that the Satellite of Love has been redesigned. What is he talking about? The cable audience might never know, since the cable channel eventually stopped airing the first season at the request of the writers. We'll get into that a little bit. There's a lot in the Amazing Colossal episode guide about how embarrassed they are about the first season. So in the Invention Exchange, Tom Servo's new voice is unveiled, and we meet Dr. Forrester's new assistant, a living soft-serve ice cream cone named TV's Frank. The invention itself is, I think, an Aliens reference.
I can confirm that it is an Aliens reference.
Okay, thank you. Also, he's a pretty good drummer.
I can confirm that he is not a pretty good drummer.
Okay, our producer Chris has just entered the stream to inform us that no, in fact, Joel is not a good drummer. In segment 2, the gang fill in the backstories of the movie's deferential press corps, who will, quote, do anything for a story unless they're told to withhold information. In segment 3, Joel quizzes the bots on the comedy potential of fishing wire anti-gravity effects.
The object you're going to be floating has to have a high degree for humor or levity. Just a little joke for the TAs there.
Funny floating object, a harmonica. Not funny, sand. Extremely funny, woodchuck. Extremely unfunny, Gallagher. Segment 4 is another nebulous reference to the lost first season that involves future host Mike Nelson and drag. And the episode concludes with the gang reflecting on the irony of watching a movie about people trapped in space. So, Adam, did you like this episode?
Yeah, actually, I really did. Beth, did you like this episode?
It's better than I remembered. Joel and the bots were great. The movie itself, it's better than The Martian. I will say that.
I think you killed Chris. Can that be our new rating scale, is whether or not the experiments are better than The Martian?
I just thought that movie was... The movie is your typical 50s, patted out all to hell slog, but it had its charming moments. It wasn't as bad as I remembered, and as I said, Joel and the bots, their commentary was a lot sharper and funnier than I remember.
Yeah, I would say that this would be actually, to my surprise, it would be a pretty decent episode to start off with. But yeah, the movie's totally terrible. But it is better than certain other films. I will certainly say that. It's not the worst 1950s science fiction movie I have seen. But yeah, I like the episode. Them's were some good riffs.
It's funny because in my head, I generally avoided season 2 as being a season where they hadn't quite got their footing yet. That there was a lot of like dull points where you get a half hour where nothing really was happening, jokes wise. But this has not been the case. I thought they were sharp and dead on in terms of connecting with their movie. So I was pleasantly surprised. And I just want to add, since you mentioned how dull and bad this movie is, I wanted to bring in the amazing Colossal episode guide at this point.
Ooh.
Yes, because TV's Frank has a special section about this, and he says that he thought that this was a really bad movie. And he says, I quote, "I thought I knew something about how painful a really bad movie can be. But I was soon to discover that in terms of craftsmanship and style, Rocketship X-M was far above just about every other movie we subsequently did."
Whoa, this is the movie that nearly killed TV's Frank.
Well, it was his first one. It was the first movie with Best Brains that he did, and he thought it was a real slog, but in retrospect, it was dull but competent.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Beth, personally. What would you rather watch? I'm really curious. What would you rather watch, unmisted? Rocketship X-M or This Island Earth?
Ooh,
because they're kind of the same beast in a way.
I would like to say that I like Rocketship X-M better because it's smaller budget and more charming, but I have to admit This Island Earth at least has more goofiness going on in terms of the color effects. And yeah, it's just because it has a bigger budget and it's doing more things and it has more action. I would have to say This Island Earth, at least without any misty commentary, would be less painful to watch and maybe even entertaining at some points.
Oh yeah, like I completely agree. Like Rocketship X-M, what's weird was that watching it for the second time, like the first time I watched it, I just thought the movie was terrible. Like watching it as an experiment, or I should say, watching it as part of the episode. Because watching it as an experiment just sounds like I was up all night watching Rocketship X-M by myself. But like watching it the second time, it was like there were interesting ideas that like nothing happened with. But something like This Island Earth is really colorful. And I think there's a really neat contrast. Both leads are really patronizing. You have like Lloyd Bridges and Rex Reason in This Island Earth.
Is that his last name?
His last name, his full name is Rex Reason. I kid you not.
I didn't catch that.
He's a man with that chin and that voice. And
we're gonna get into chins later on. I have some comments about chins and how this movie did not follow protocol on chinness and who should be following the lead.
Ooh, chintiquette. But what I was going to say is that, like, I agree completely. Like, This Island Earth, for all of its, like, flaws, because it's a very, very corny movie, is not terribly dull, has great art direction, and the only effect that's super crappy, because like even the like you might say that the enhanced foreheads are dumb, and you'd be right, but they're like a pretty good effect, especially for the time. They're on par with your, like, I don't know, 80s Star Trek aliens probably.
Don't talk about their heads.
And the Metaluna mutant is so bad that it crosses over into great. He's easily the worst Universal movie monster. He's wearing slacks because they just kind of couldn't finish the costume, I guess. But like the stuff that's on their planet is like a gorgeous matte painting, and there's a cool Forbidden Planet style flying saucer that they fly in at the end. It's like, it's not bad. It's not the worst movie they've ever done. Rocketship X-M is way worse, but I was curious about that.
Yeah, it is definitely suffering from a lot of movies that we will see in the future that are done in the 50s, just very low budget and having to just make do with whatever set or landscape they're inserted into without really any extra effects. In the words of a future MST3K episode, this is like watching an aquarium.
Oh, I can only imagine an aquarium with Lloyd Bridges and Hugh O'Brien inside. Beth, I have 2 words and a question for you, and it's this. Hugh O'Brien?
Hugh O'Brien plays Harry Chamberlain in the movie. I believe the bots refer to him as Dick Squarejaw, and he's the navigator. He's going to navigate them to the moon. So when Joel and the bots are about to enter into the experiment, Dr. Forrester mentions that Lloyd Bridges is in it, and their reaction is, okay. And then he mentions Hugh O'Brien, and they all freak out. And I was trying to figure out what it was about Hugh O'Brien that would elicit such a response. And there is nothing in his filmography or his personal history that suggests that he's anything other than a conventional actor and a pretty straight-up guy. He created a scholarship for youth leaders. He did a lot of Westerns, and he has that amazing jaw, which I had forgotten about this movie. So when I first saw him, I immediately thought, he must be the lead because he has the biggest jaw. And that is how it works in these movies. And he also seemed like a much nicer character.
Oh, God, yes.
And he seemed to, at least initially, have a chemistry with Dr. Lisa Van Horn. Certainly, it seemed to me that Lloyd Bridges, or Floyd Graham, that he was being set up as the villain because he's undercutting the brilliant scientist every chance he gets. And I thought that was setting up a triangle in which Hugh O'Brien would be the straight-up awesome navigator who saves the day and gets the lady. But that jaw lied to me.
and lied to us all. But I have a question, though. Do you think that, that makes a lot of sense now? Because, of course, someone like Hugh O'Brien, both on looks and how he relates to Dr. Van Horn, would make sense as a lead right now. But for a film that was made in 1950, would a doughier, far more patronizing guy be the ideal lead?
Oh, that's a good question. I think you might be able to say more to that than me. I would think that, especially he looked really good in a leather jacket. I was thinking maybe he would be like the quiet rebel who would surprise us all and kind of fit into that James Dean kind of ethos that was going on. Although maybe this is pre-James Dean, but the sense that he would be the quiet, unassuming person, in the 50s, kind of don't rock the boat, who would end up being the strong hero at the end.
Yeah, he was certainly more interesting, and it's hard not to be nauseated as a viewer with how the relationship with Colonel Floyd and Dr. Van Horn progresses, because he wins. He just goes, listen, lady, why don't you stop doing all that science and start being a lady and just press your face against my face like a bunch of cold mashed potatoes.
We get something that actually never happens in real life. A successful PUA.
Yeah, he totally negs her. He negs the out of Dr. Van Horn to the point where I almost expected the movie to burst into an educational film, because I expected the frame to stop at any moment and for Lloyd Bridges to come out and go, what you see right there is what we'd call a microaggression. Now, you may not have seen it, I may not have seen it, but it's there. To help us out, here's Hugh O'Brien. It would have made so much sense if this was a film about not doing that, if it was an educational short.
Well, maybe we should move into that then, about the strange relationship this movie has to its female lead, Dr. Lisa Van Horn.
Yes, because while I was watching the movie, I immediately started to play a little game. And it's called, How Often is Dr. Lisa Van Horn interrupted by a dude, or has her sentence finished by a dude? It doesn't happen as often as I was expecting, because it happens at least, it happens about 3 times. And then in other aspects of the movie related to it, there's that scene where basically they go over the course trajectory of Rocketship X-M, and the older doctor, whose name I'm unfortunately blanking on.
Dr. Ekstrom.
Yes, thank you.
It's a Ghostbusters name.
Oh. He insists on using his calculations, even though she's like convinced that she's right. The movie never really makes anything about that other than at the very, very end where she goes, oh, I think I was wrong. I have doomed us to burn over Nova Scotia, etc. at the end of the film.
It's all my fault.
Yeah. And only the love of Lloyd Bridges can heal me.
Well, that was one of the strange... I'm trying very hard not to look at the gender politics of a movie that was done in the 50s with 21st century glasses, because that's somewhat unfair. But this movie seems to set her up just to get her knocked down. At first, there's the comment that Colonel Floyd makes that she's the only one whose blood pressure is normal. She is totally chill. So it suggests that, she is going to be an extremely competent member of the team.
Yeah, she's the Spock.
Yeah, and in a way, it is like she's the Ice Queen that has to be melted. But that would not suggest that she's going to be incompetent. And the movie leaves that up in the air. It's not clear if she screwed up or Dr. X-M did. And then at the end, she's like, oh, it's all my fault. But she doesn't really explain how it's her fault. It's just that it's like she is taking on the original sin of the movie or something.
What would have really sold that for me is if during that moment we had a flashback, like a giant floating head, kind of Lisa Needs Braces style flashback to Dr. Ekstrom saying, I must conclude you've made a mistake, like just echoing, as that's one of the ways he undercuts her in the movie. Like there's a lot of moments like there's the infamous "Isn't that enough?" dialogue. There's a moment where Dr. Ekstrom goes, surely you won't let emotion enter into this. And possibly like the second most cringy moment behind Isn't That Enough is where she apologizes, and one of the characters, I forget if it's Floyd or Ekstrom, but one of the characters goes, apologize for what? For momentarily being a woman?
Yes.
It's so antiquated and so, like it's almost comical, and it's not helped by like the low budget shooting style where everything on the ship looks like a sitcom. Like, it looks like you're watching Gilligan's Island in space.
Yeah, it's not what I now think of as what rockets look like.
Most of it is stock footage, admittedly.
And when they go down to fix, like, the rocket fuel proportions, and they go down under, it just looks like my old basement. Like, there's the water heater over there, there's the furnace, there's the newly installed water softener. You have to bang it every once in a while for it to work properly.
Yeah, the Satellite of Love set, which was made for, I'm going to guess, a fraction of the budget of even Rocketship X-M, and was built out of old toys. Like, they just kit bashed that set and, like, painted it gray or beige or whatever it is. That looks way more futuristic and spacey than Rocketship X-M. But, the budgetary leanings, you get just how kind of Poverty Row this is, where it's like, we made it to Mars, and Mars looks exactly like Bronson Canyon, which is where every California desert or outer space planet thing was shot. Like, it's perhaps most famous for the Star Trek episode Arena, where Kirk fights the Gorn.
I just want to point out that was the Martian's problem, too.
Too many Gorns?
Yes.
Because if Matt Damon fought the Gorn, like, I would have seen the movie 8 times.
He throws potatoes at them.
But I'm curious, do you think Dr. Lisa Van Horn's a bad scientist?
I think she must be the most brilliant scientist on Earth because she somehow found a way to get to Mars in, like, a nap.
You know what? I can't speak to her scientific abilities, though I will say that, the fact that she gives so much considerations to her calculations and whether or not she's right, I kind of respect that she goes over her things and but like isn't certain. Like there's something about the way that her thinking process is portrayed in the movie, even though I think you're supposed to, at the end, I think for audiences, they were supposed to be led by the hand and go, she was just being a lady. That's why they ended up on Mars or whatever. That's more or less the plot of the movie.
You let them on the rocket ship. They're going to make you pull over. and go check out Mars.
But like I found her more interesting. I found the fact that like she was the only character who second guessed herself or gave anything any other thought. And there's one moment in particular that made her like the polar opposite of my least favorite character in the movie. Yes, there's a character more annoying than Colonel Floyd, and that is the Texas Chekhov who always goes on about Texoff.
William Corrigan.
Yes, and there's one scene in particular where like I felt like she was my voice in the movie. And that's where the jacket starts floating due to the effects of gravity, zero gravity. And everybody is pissing themselves laughing. Like, look, a jacket, look, a harmonica. And they think it's hysterical. And Dr. Lisa Van Horn is like, what? It's a float. It's just gravity, guys. It's just a jacket. And I was like, yes.
Well, this is another interesting little wrinkle in the movie where everyone seems to be surprised about what they find in space. Now, this isn't NASA, obviously, but whatever ground crew they have working did not sufficiently prep this group for what they would encounter in space. They're like, it's dark and things float. What is going on?
Yeah, they're way more surprised that like the effects of zero gravity than they are when they encounter cavemen on Mars.
It's true. They're more horrified that the cavemen on Mars are cavemen and not that there is life on Mars.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about is that like since this is season 2 and we've got some cast changes. I want to ask you about my favorite piece of fan mail that was ever sent to Mystery Science Theater 3000, which was immediately after this episode aired, somebody sent in the letter, "I hate Tom Servo's new voice." And I'm just curious, like, tell me about what you thought for this like very first outing for both Kevin Murphy as Tom Servo and Frank Conniff, of course, as the inimitable TV's Frank.
Well, I'd like to add to that, again, drawing from the Amazing Colossal episode guide, that it wasn't just a letter. It was a banner 10 feet long, which read in big block letters, "I hate Tom Servo's new voice." And you have to remember, this is the early 90s, so that is a dot matrix printer with like the holes that they would have to pull off on the side.
That's amazing.
Tear it off. All the papers would be connected so that you could actually put it up as a banner.
That's way better than what I had remembered then, because I just thought it was just like a single piece, like just all bold, but it was a 10-foot long banner.
And apparently he held Kevin Murphy put it in his office and it was there for years, just behind the desk.
Oh, that's great. But I like that. Wow. But going back to it, I am curious, like how did you find like his first outing? Because like this is the Tom Servo that most of us know. Like he did 8 seasons of the show.
I would later hear J. Elvis Weinstein, and it sounded wrong. So it's just what you're used to. I always thought that Kevin Murphy did a really good job in Tom Servo. He had a personality, a little bit pompous, a little bit full of himself, and I think they established that from the get-go. And good for him, because I think even with Crow, there was a sense of like Trace Beaulieu wasn't quite sure what he was doing with Crow at first. Tom Servo just felt like he was fully formed. Frank, TV's Frank. I did not like TV's Frank, I have to admit, when I first watched this show.
Oh.
And I know.
I'm shocked. I'm even a little hurt, and I don't know why.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to say I was a disaffected teenager, and I maybe didn't get it, because now I think TV's Frank is amazing and one of the best parts of the show. Again, he's just feeling his way through, but he already had like Frank's sense of detachment. His sweetness was there from the get-go. He reacted to pain in just the way he should. Yeah, they were great. Certainly, it was only an improvement. It didn't have that unsettling Aunt Vivian kind of shift quality to it. So I think all the changes were well thought through. And they just slipped into the show seamlessly for me.
Yeah, I have to say with the cast changes, like in fact, I will say with like all of the cast changes, because we had talked about what era, or well, not even what era, but I should say what host we prefer. Like I think from Brain That Wouldn't Die onwards, not to get too much into that, but like Mike is, he'd been on the show, he'd been like head writer since season 2, I think, or maybe he was head writer as of season 1, don't know, but he had been on the show for that time and he'd been appearing regularly, and he slides very comfortably as host and establishes his own dynamic from episode 1, I think. And I think like all of the cast changes that like had those major ones, like with Frank and Kevin and Mike, those 3 in particular, they do so with total ease. Like one thing I did notice is that like I think that in season 2 and like a little bit of season 3, Kevin is doing like a straight up impression of J. Elvis Weinstein. And you can kind of hear it, and like it's interesting because like much like Trace would with Crow, Weinstein would kind of like figure his way out with the voice, and so he went from this kind of Muppety voice in the earliest KTMA episodes to going through a robot puberty and developing that like big pompous sound, and like Kevin kind of took that and ran with it and then kind of mellowed out over the years, just as like Crow kind of has like even in this episode kind of like a more, I don't want to say Kermity kind of voice, but like an almost more cartoon character voice than he would have later on. I'm always amazed at like say around season 3, season 4 of the show that Trace Ballou or Boulia, I'm always a little confused.
Yeah, we will always be confused about that.
Yeah, Trace, if you can hear us right now, please reach out to us with a guide on how to say your name.
Have you anglicized it, or should we try our best Quebecois accents?
Oh, and let's not. But I'm always amazed by like how well he's able to differentiate his own voice, like in later seasons, by doing like it seems so effortless, because he's like in the earlier seasons of the show, he's clearly doing like a character, so you don't associate Crow with Dr. Forrester, but like the change is so slight in later seasons, but it's like it's effortless. You wouldn't necessarily make that connection. Like he sells that really well. Like he's a really, really talented and underrated performer.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and to me, like more than even Joel as creator, like I think Trace and Frank are kind of the heart of the show, and I think that that the show suffers in their absence. It
certainly does. It turned into a very different beast when Frank left. I mean, there were still some very excellent episodes, but it kind of lost its heart.
Yeah. So, Beth, one of the things that that we had mentioned in talking back and forth online is the movie's latent homoeroticism.
Yes. This was really fascinating for me to re-encounter because it made me think about the relationship this series has, MST3K, to queer sensibilities. Because as far as I know, I don't think any of the writers or anyone involved was outwardly, LGBT. But they have this way of kind of keying in, especially with this movie, and kind of like queer subtext. And one that really struck me was the relationship between Dr. Ekstrom and I think his name is Dr. Ralph Fleming, who's the project director.
Yeah.
And they immediately zero in on that, and they make a bunch of Siegfried and Roy jokes. But and this is something I'm struggling with. Are they pointing it out in kind of frattish, like, haha, that's gay? Or are they keying into a subtext? And I am going to say it's the latter, because were it not for them pointing it out, I don't know if I would have noticed that these two characters have a very sweet, very, they're like cooing doves at one point. Like, it looks like they're about to nestle each other's necks. But it's subtle, and I don't think I would have picked up on it if Joel and the bots hadn't pointed it out.
Yeah, like I agree with you too. Like, there's one thing I do remember in much the same way that I'm hesitant to like look back on say episodes that focus on Japanese movies, because I recall there being like a lot of Japanese style voices from Mike and or Joel and the bots, and that's not going to age well. And I was worried that because I do remember there being a lot of like kind of reading into that, and like Siegfried and Roy type jokes were a recurring thing on the Satellite of Love, and I wasn't sure how that was going to be. But I think I agree with you completely. Like, it seems like they were highlighting something that they picked up on as if they were questioning it too. It's like, is this in the movie? Is this intentional, or is this almost a happy accident that these two come across as lovers?
Yeah, I think we can safely say it wasn't intended, but
I don't know.
But it's certainly like near the end of the movie that Dr. Ralph Fleming, when he finds out that they have shortwave radio, he's like, what happened to Dr. Erkstrom? Like that is his first question. It's actually quite touching when you read the movie with that subtext in mind. It becomes doubly tragic because it's not the destruction of one couple, but two. And maybe the Texan guy had a wife. I don't know.
Oh, God, I can't imagine. Like, listen, when she gets the letter that, Texas Chekhov blew up over Nova Scotia or died on Mars, I forget, she will be relieved, as we all were when he died.
Adam, speaking of kind of 1950s movies and what we can expect from them, I wanted to see what you had to say about this movie's strange pedigree.
Yeah, like it's one of the things that came to mind, and there were no riffs on it, so I had to look it up, was the movie was produced and directed by Kurt Newman. And he's also credited as the writer, but that's not entirely true. But I'll get into that in a second. Kurt Mooman, that's his cow character that he's working on the side for vaudeville. But Kurt Newman is best known as the director of the original Fly.
Oh, okay.
And The Fly, like, as much as people made fun of it and became like kind of like a pop culture punchline for the Help Me scene, The Fly is like a great sci-fi movie. I think it's mislabeled as a horror movie because of the Cronenberg version, which is undeniably a horror movie.
Yes.
Whereas The Fly is just a science fiction fantasy.
Yeah, so it doesn't have the body horror aspect as much?
Well, it's there, but it's there in like a far more like fantastical and like I would say less horrifying way. Like there's the infamous scene that's in all of the trailers for the movie, and even growing up in Canada on the Sci-Fi Channel here, whenever they would play a movie, they would always show this clip from The Fly as part of their "we're showing a movie" montage, which is where the scientist's wife in The Fly takes off. There's like he has like a hood or a blanket covering his head, and she pulls it off, but is horrified to find that he has a giant fly head.
Horrified. That's perfect.
Horrified, I think, would be the great like trauma version of that movie. But yeah, like it is an interesting movie, and I think that The Fly it's very colorful. The special effects are fantastic for the time, and it's very imaginative.
So all the things that Rocketship X-M isn't.
It's the exact opposite. And I think that like it's less kind of about like the horror of your body changing. Like Cronenberg did with his 80s remake what John Carpenter did with his remake of The Thing, which was to focus on like body disintegration and body horror in general. Whereas The Fly, it's just about we've created a monster. Like the Fly is no different than the Frankenstein's monster from the Universal horror movies. It's just that there's like this kind of horrible other side where you have a fly body and a human head, and later that guy gets eaten by a spider.
Well, what did you think of the monsters in this movie?
They suck. They're just cavemen. It's the worst.
Cavemen with some back acne.
Yes, like it's just a bunch of Tor Johnsons running around throwing rocks, and again, it's hard not to sympathize with them because I wanted to throw rocks at all of the cast members. Like, this movie is terrible. It's unexpectedly, like I said, like it has an interesting background in that, like, the script was written by like Dalton Trumbo while he was on the blacklist, which really surprised me. But it might explain why there are interesting ideas in the movie that would later be put to better use in a little movie called Planet of the Apes. But there's a great riff when they land on the planet where they say, hey, there's Charlton Heston and James Franciscus. That's exactly what they find. They find that instead of it being Earth all along when they land on Mars, it's basically your worst fears are confirmed. You're landing on a post-war planet. Society's in ruins, and there's even a line where Dr. Ekstrom, I think, goes, my God, they've gone from atomic age to stone age, to hammer it home. But that's a really cool idea, and the movie spends about 10 minutes with it.
Yeah, it really gets rushed through, and I guess they're trying to suggest some... And this is really interesting, because after the bombing of Hiroshima, they didn't know what effect that radiation would have long term. So there was actually a belief that the radiation would mutate the DNA and would be affecting offspring for thousands of years.
Yeah.
That turned out not to be the case. Thank God.
Yes.
But you can see that happening here, that there's this idea that there has been genetic mutation with the back acne and I guess the blindness, but it's only hinted at, and it's actually not that bad. You know, as things go, you know, she was a pretty lady who had a nice dress.
Yeah.
She seemed to be doing fine, except for, you know, not being able to see what was making those horrible noises at her. And she seemed to have like a supportive society, and they seem to be doing pretty good.
Where did that one cave lady get her dress? Because everyone else is in thongs. Everyone else is in rags.
Yeah, and just like oh no, they don't have cars. This is the worst thing that could ever happen. Well, you know, they seem to be doing okay.
Yeah, but that's just it. It's like if the movie, like, it's so weird because the movie's even called like Rocketship X-M, Rocketship Expedition Moon. And what I found out about the movie is that in order to throw off any potential lawsuits, because the film Destination Moon was coming out, some posters for the movie, apparently, this I found on Wikipedia, I didn't find it on any of the posters, but some of them apparently had the disclaimer, this movie is not Destination Moon. Which is fantastic.
But movies have a weird way of doing that, right? Like when what was it? There was a volcano movie at the same time that there was Dante's Peak.
Yeah, that was just Volcano with Anne Heche and Tommy Lee Jones.
And there was another one, like, it just seems like something gets in the zeitgeist, and then you'll just get kind of copycat movies that don't mean to actually reflect each other, but are just responding to the same cultural mix.
Yeah, and in the best case scenario, you get two great movies like Jurassic Park and Carnosaur.
Hey, Gene Siskel loved that movie.
Yes, and he's totally right. Gene Siskel supported both Carnosaur and Kids in the Hall Presents Brain Candy, which makes him the better of the two.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was the only thumb up on Brain Candy, kids. But, I find it's so weird that there's a much more interesting movie that, like, no one seemed to realize was there. Because, like, you could make a low-budget We're Trapped on Mars movie that actually, like, looked at, oh, no, we're actually kind of looking at Earth's future. Because, pointedly, they're not trying to explore the moon. They're trying to build a military base on the moon.
Right.
And the movie ends, and, like, this could have been so much more effective if they spent more time on Mars. The movie ends with Dr. Ekstrom's lover, Dr. Ralph, or whatever his name is, Dr. Giggles, I don't know. He says, it's like, well, tell the press that tomorrow we start building Rocketship X-M 2, as if to suggest a sequel that no one wants to see.
Can we talk about the press in this movie?
Please do.
Okay. I don't know if this was actually the relationship that was expected between government organizations and the press, but it was certainly something that I think the current administration would like, in terms of like, well, here's what we would like you to say, and we'd really appreciate it if you just stuck to the script. And the press is like, okay.
Yeah. It's so weird because, like, and especially watching movies, you're used to the crusading reporter narrative.
Like, yeah, the enterprising Lois Lane. Like, basically, if for the longest time, if you wanted to be an assertive female character, you had to be a reporter.
Yeah. And like, you know, if you were a fast talking reporter, as you would almost expect from a movie like this, you would not stand for just going with what the administration says, and you'd want to find out more about secret radio tapes about finding cavemen on Mars. Like, there's a lot of interesting seeds in this movie. Like, can you imagine if they had the budget that they had, which was super, super low? What if it was about reporters uncovering these tapes about this doomed mission to the moon, and they found out that, like, they actually landed on Mars due to some miscalculation, and they found essentially like a monster society? That would be an amazing movie.
That would be such a better frame for this movie.
Yeah.
If it was, instead of just, hello, boys and girls, here is a chalk drawing of a rocket ship.
I think it's kind of interesting that the original movie's title and presumably like Dalton Trumbo's like first scripts, they were titled "None Came Home," which, as far as like spoiling the movie goes, is like calling Psycho Norman Bates is one bad mother.
Very good.
But it to me is really unusual that they would call it that as the movie's presented, and it makes me wonder if the original scripts focused on this is doomed from the start. They know they're going to die, and they spend 90 minutes knowing that they're going to die, rather than it being kind of like a last-minute thing after a long, pointless sojourn in space, and then 10 minutes on Mars, and then kissing Lloyd Bridges with tears in your eyes.
I want to mention that she does that very 50s thing that you get with a lot of starlets with their lovers, where she like nuzzles her lover's neck as if she's trying to climb into his body. Ingrid Bergman does this in Casablanca too. Go watch it.
Oh my God, I did not know that. I'm curious, do you think then that perhaps she was possessed by the Martian hive mind and was actually trying to infiltrate Lloyd Bridges' body? She's not really herself.
That would be amazing. Unfortunately, I think it's just the sense that you have to have your female lead collapse into a man at the end.
I think what we're getting at here is that Rocketship X-M is a perfect movie to remake, because you can make a really good movie with all of these elements. It's just the final product is terrible.
That, I think, is maybe a good way of looking at this movie, that unlike a lot of movies that MST3K addresses, there were good building blocks here. There was some potential. It wasn't just garbage from the get-go. And
I will say that, I think other movies and other sci-fi in general really did pick and run with this. I think Rocketship X-M was a movie that got seen by a lot of people, and was probably like frequently used as like a TV matinee movie too, for like kids growing up in the 60s and 70s. And because like you can see its influence in Planet of the Apes, which I've already mentioned. Like, all of the Planet of the Apes movies, I think, have a sense of doom that has less to do with the original novel and a lot to do with like the unusual ending of Rocketship X-M. And Rocketship X-M, you even see that in there's a great British science fiction series of like movies and like TV miniseries called Quatermass. Have you seen those?
No, I have not.
Okay, so they're super, super old, but they're really quite good. And the ones to see, even more than the TV versions, are the filmed trilogy by Hammer Film Studios. And the Quatermass trilogy, the very, very first one, has almost the exact same ending as Rocketship X-M, where a doomed space mission from the British rocket group comes down. There's only one survivor, and the guy comes back as like a total horrible radioactive monster. It's like a really good Monster a Go-Go, basically.
No such thing.
It's possible, believe me. And the hero, if you can call him that, is a scientist named Dr. Quatermass. And once the monster is disposed of, they're not able to save him. They're not able to heal him. A reporter turns to him and he's like, I guess this dooms like any future plans. And he quite ominously says, no. We're starting another moon mission, or whatever mission it is, to space first thing tomorrow morning. And that movie ends with him walking away, and there's like doom-laden music playing.
So you're making the argument that as dull as this movie is, it did have influence.
Yeah, I think that people either this movie was better received at the time, which I could see, like it certainly plays to a 50s audience.
Yes.
And so there's that. But I also think that, like, people saw that it's the equivalent of, I don't know, going to an open mic and seeing a really bad comedy show and going, I can do better than that. Because Forbidden Planet is kind of you can kind of see an influence on that as well, I think. And that's a fantastic movie that has aged pretty well, actually.
Yeah. I do also want to give some props to this movie for imagining a woman on the first mission to the moon, however badly they treated her once she was on it, because there has yet to be a woman on the moon. And this was 1950. The first woman in space was in 1963, so 13 years later, and that was a Soviet woman named Valentina Tereshkova. America didn't send a woman in space until 1983.
Oh, geez.
Her name was Sally Ride, and she was awesome.
Please tell me that either that astronaut or that cosmonaut dedicated their victory to Dr. Lisa Van Horn from Rocketship X-M.
I should hope so. We're doing this for you, Lisa. So, Adam, I think it may be time for our first ever listener mail.
Wow, that's really weird because we've never put out an episode before.
I think Chris might have to help us with this part. Chris?
Hello, Beth. Hello, Adam. Okay, our very first random question from a listener comes from longtime fan of the show, Michael from Toronto. He asks, who is your favorite Star Trek captain?
Beth?
Yeah, I wish I could be creative about this, but it's Picard. There are no other starship captains. I like other captains for other reasons, but he's just the ultimate Star Trek captain.
Well, I think that if we're talking Star Trek captains, it's like, it depends on where we are. If we're in TV land, obviously it's Picard. If we're in movies, obviously it's Kirk. Because, like, man, the Captain Picard in the movies, as has been commented elsewhere on the internet, bears no resemblance to the guy from the TV show you fell in love with. However, if we're talking about Mystery Science Theater 3000, in the movie theater, the references that you want to hear are, of course, to William Shatner saying, Spock! And if we're talking about who can do the best impression in a host segment, let's never forget the inimitable impression and makeup job on Michael J. Nelson when he became Captain Janeway.
That was incredible, and it was probably the best impression I've ever seen on that show. I will say, love Janeway. She's a kick-ass. She brought back benign addictions to the 24th century in terms of coffee.
I love coffee. Chakotay.
And I'm a bigger fan of Deep Space Nine.
Oh, totally.
I like Sisko, especially after the third season where he's a little less sleepy and detached and becomes kind of an ass kicker. But I just can't... Patrick Stewart just annihilates the role of captain and takes it to a level that I don't think we can expect anyone to ever reach again.
Yeah, I agree with that. If I may say something, it's like, with Sisko, you have him becoming like an interesting character and like a harder, edgier character. Whereas like Captain Picard goes from like a stuffy, uninteresting, like high school principal in space.
Oh yeah, he's a prick in the first season.
Yeah, to becoming like an aspirational figure. Like he is kind of Gene Roddenberry's philosophy on two legs. And minus all the weird sex stuff, I guess.
Did you know that Counselor Troy was originally supposed to have 4 breasts?
Yes, I had heard that.
It would just be such a distraction that you would have to rename the show 4 Boobs in Space.
Yeah, not to mention that it's like if Troy has 4 boobs, why doesn't Riker have 4 hands?
They are supposed to be connected.
Yes, and you would feel that. But if I were to say philosophically how I handle my Star Trek captains, I tend to think of myself as Captain Picard on the streets and Captain Kirk between the sheets.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam a random question, get in touch with us. Email us at info@itsjustashow.com, visit our website at itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, Beth, Adam, the episode we're going to talk about next time is Season 6, Episode 20, Danger, Death Ray.
Ooh.
Do you remember anything about this episode, Adam?
I do remember. I remember 2 things specifically, but my favorite thing that I hope is as prominent in the movie as it is in my memory is that the theme music to the movie just goes ba ba da ba da da Da, 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 da. And that's not a vocalization of the orchestra. It really is just vocal theme music.
Oh, I love 60s vocal theme music.
Yeah, it's like Danger Diabolic, which is like a rad movie on its own.
Or Starfighters, which is the entire movie.
You know, I've never seen that.
It's amazing. The one thing I remember about this episode is Crow making a very astute comment. Apparently, the death ray is kind of like nuclear arsenal, in that it's supposed to prevent wars because it's so devastating. So they make that pitch, and then Crow smartly observes that it is a peace-loving death ray.
All right, so until then.
See you next time, everybody.
Good night, and may God bless.
It's all my fault. 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 Fault.